Welcome to the Holmlands Adventure Podcast. Storytelling inspired by adventure.
Welcome to the Holmlands Adventure Podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Hall. I'm delighted to be joined today by professional skier, writer and producer, Nat Segal, joining us all the way from Revelstoke. How are you doing, Nat?
Good. I've got my coffee, so life's great.
How's the winter season gone for you? It's obviously the end of the winter now. How do you look back on the season that's just been?
It was a great winter here in Revelstoke. We had unprecedented amounts of snow. There's still about a metre of snow in my backyard, and a lot of snow in the mountains, but just because of sort of social distancing and other things, I'm not really skiing. But the start of the season was amazing. December and January were just all powder, and same moving into February, it was still going. But unfortunately, I injured myself in mid-February. So I've sort of been on a pretty mellow program for the last 2 months.
And so on the road to recovery now.
Yeah. I had knee surgery at the beginning of March, just a meniscus cleanup, and so I'm back on it, but I won't be skiing probably until next winter. So I'm just going to have to mountain bike all summer.
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
So we initially got connected through your film Finding the Line, which we were delighted to screen the UK premiere of at our second annual Four Seasons Film Festival last year. The film's something that I want to come on to and talk about. But just in terms of skiing and your background in that, being a career, when did it all start for you?
Ooh, that's a hard question. I think there was not one moment. It was really progressive. I skied moguls I competed as sort of just an amateur athlete, under 18. I sort of raced, I skied moguls. I traveled a little bit with that, but nothing too much. And then I moved to Chamonix when I was 21. I took a gap year from university. I was studying painting and fine arts. And I saw a different style of skiing that I'd never seen before because I'd grown up in some pretty small mountains in Australia. And so moving to the Alps and sort of seeing not just freeride skiing, but also backcountry skiing and big mountain skiing, my perspective just changed. And I lived with a family who in Chamonix as their au pair, and I worked for them. And the mum was actually the French PR person for the Freeride World Tour. And she just sort of told me about her job, and I started watching and paying attention to the Freeride World Tour. And that year I realised at the end of working for her for 6 months, I sort of said to her, I think I want to become a competitive freeride skier. What do I do first? And she gave me some random advice. And then the next year I came back and did my first competition. And so I think that was the beginning, but it took me years to sort of really get into competition and do it properly. I still had to finish my degree. And I think this idea that something happens really quickly is a bit false. Like it was sort of a 3 or 4 year progress until I really started my career.
So in terms of being involved in Freeride World Tour, was that quite serendipitous then? Did you go to Chamonix with any designs to become a pro beforehand, or was it just I'm going to go and enjoy Chamonix and explore the mountains, or did you go to think, okay, well, there might be the possibility that I'll come out of this with a route to becoming a professional athlete?
I actually just was really sick of my university degree, and I'd been coaching free skiing in Australia every winter. So I was sort of still skiing, but only for fun, and on the weekends coaching. And I wanted to go to France because I studied French and I'd spent some time in Les Arcs as an exchange student. So I went back to visit them, and with no other plans during my gap year. And I ended up just deciding I wanted to go to Chamonix because a friend had told me it was cool. So that was about as far as I got. And I actually went and stayed in a hostel and realised I needed to get some work for a little bit. And so I went there without my skis. I met some people in the hostel and I found this job and was like, cool, I'm going to stay here for a while. And then these guys I met in the hostel took me out skiing, and we didn't even go and do anything scary, but we went up to Brabant and sort of hiked along a ridgeline and skied a couloir. And I was on 169 park skis. I had my goggles under my helmet. I was a total newbie. And I think they were jumping off stuff the whole way along the ridgeline, and I was just following them because I like jumping because from moguls. And these guys thought I was hilarious, but I think I also gained a bit of their respect because I just kept on trying even though I kept falling over. And I skied my first couloir and I was just like, that was so sick. And so I think after that I was just kind of hooked. But it took me a really long time to gain the skills to ski what I now ski. A really long time. Like before that I was just crashing everywhere.
And did you have any big mountain skiing experience at all before going out to Chamonix? You know, obviously growing up in Australia, you do have ski hills there, but had you been over to Europe or North America before as a kid growing up?
No, not really. I had spent, I'd done 2 training camps actually in Silver Star in Canada. So I'd been to Canada with Chamonix training, but we stuck to moguls and we had an air site that we jumped on. And I think we skied powder a little bit in the mornings before training, but never proper big mountain skiing, never anything especially like in Europe.
And I think I'm right in saying that your mum was involved in ski patrol as well when you were a kid.
Yeah.
Did she have much of an influence on you taking the route that you've gone down?
I mean, she introduced us to skiing and was very supportive of us in the sense that she never pushed us into competitions or anything like that, but if we begged her and we sort of proved to her that it's what we wanted to do, she would support us. And so I think we were really lucky in that. She sort of supported our dreams, but she sort of just didn't give us things just willy-nilly. Like if we really proved to her we wanted to do it and put in the work, she would do her best to help us. So I was able to go on exchange to France because I wanted to organise it and go on a year to a outdoor ed school and things like that. Just if we were proactive, she would really try and get behind us. So I think that is really important.
So before going to Chamonix, you already had the language as part of your repertoire. You could speak French and you could integrate a little bit into the town.
Yeah, I studied French for 12 years. And then when I decided I wanted to go to France, I took an extra subject at school just so that I could still speak it. But I was still atrocious at speaking French. I was really bad. I remember I'm still in contact. The mother of the family who I looked after, we're still in contact, and we actually interviewed her partner, Francois Pollange, who's actually in the film as one of the guides we speak to. And he got me my first pair of ski touring skis or ski touring setup. And they gave me a lot of advice while I lived with them. I think they thought I was crazy. Anyway, tangent. But she told me how bad my French was when I first arrived. And even 6 months after working with her, and sort of 2 years later, I came to visit her and she's like, your French is so much better. And I thought my French was great when I was working. So, yeah, I think working with 2 kids usually helps you a little bit.
Yeah, I can imagine. Immersing yourself, there's nothing quite like immersing yourself in the country and the culture, is there?
No, and I think a lot of people, though, when they're in Chamonix say, and I think there's a lot of places like that it's so international that you don't get the French side of it. But I think if you push a little bit, and sort of spend some time there, you sort of manage to slowly start speaking French. You just have to make an effort.
And so you're juggling the job with the skiing. When was there a particular turning point in the season when you realised that taking the competition seriously? Were you entering some amateur local competitions to kind of get a feel for things, or was there a defining moment when it was like, okay, right, now this is what I need to do to be able to get towards being on that stage of being on the Freeride World Tour?
Oh, no, it was way less organised than that. I actually spent that whole first season just skiing, and then I spent the next season coaching at my home mountain, and I realised there was a freeride comp in New Zealand, which I went to. And my sister was competing in slopestyle, so they were kind of like sister competitions. So I was there with her for a bit, and I competed, and I did the qualifiers and literally crashed out of the start gate. I sort of did a 1 turn and double ejected out of my skis. So that was great.
That was a moment you knew that you were going to be a pro.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, I skied the comp venue on 1 ski, so I was quite proud of that. And then the moment maybe when I really started moving forward is I went back to Chamonix for 3 months before I started my final year of university. And I made an effort to compete in sort of freeride world qualifier events. But like I said, it's kind of like building blocks. Like I did those events, but I crashed in most of them. And I was just learning the ropes and learning how things worked and sort of working out what other people were doing and what it actually meant to be on the qualifying sort of circuit and what the end goal was. So it took me a while to work that all out. So I think I did a second winter in Chamonix and competed, and then I decided to move to America for a few years, and I competed on the Freeskiing World Tour, just because I realised that the mountains in Europe, and especially living in Chamonix, weren't the best sort of training grounds for the kind of freeride I wanted to do. So I moved to Salt Lake City and Jackson Hole. So I did 2 years in both of them competing, and it was good to sort of change up the terrain and the style of skiing.
How much is it about knowing the right people as well in terms of getting involved in the circuit? You have to align yourself with certain people and ski with certain people to be able to, I guess, enter the circuit and to compete at the level that you want to be at, but also to push and develop your own skiing. I imagine that you've got to be putting yourself into groups of people that are pushing you and developing you and leading you every time you go out on the hill.
Honestly, I actually was a bit of a, not a loner, but like I didn't have a crew like that. I think there's a lot, like especially when I moved to Snowbird, there were, and even in France, there were freeride teams, and like some of the younger athletes, like I think Leo Slemmet, when I was probably 19 or 20, was in a freeride group. He's a few years younger than me, and he was still in school. And I remember meeting these like kids who were training for freeride when I was already in university, and just being really jealous of them because I didn't have anyone. I didn't have a coach. I didn't have a mentor. And I really didn't have anyone like that until maybe the year I got onto the Freeride World Tour, and there were other athletes who were sort of taking me under their wing. But before that, I called my sister for advice. And I think there's maybe something to be said about finding mentorship. And I think the programs now that sort of like pull athletes through the ranks and sort of have junior comps are amazing, but there was nothing like that when I started competing. And if anything, I was sort of adopted by little crews of people, but like I really had to work out how to do things myself, and that was pretty challenging a lot of the time, especially being Australian and people being like, can you even ski?
Anna, at the time, your sister, was she, how much of an influence was she on you in pushing yourself forward in that direction? Was she already at a competitive kind of level at that stage? Because I know she obviously had a Olympic experience. Was she somebody that you looked up to and thought, I want to follow in her footsteps? Or was she kind of pushing you in that direction as well?
She was. So my first year in France, she won her first sort of like international competition. So she was a few years ahead of me, and she was a huge inspiration because watching her compete on an international stage sort of gave me, it's like, if you see it, you feel like you can do it. She gave me a lot more confidence that it was possible to compete on an international level, even though I might have come from a slightly different background. So I think having her support, and you're sort of talking about like contacts and who you know, I think her support was really important. But I don't believe that that's how you make it as an athlete. I think I'm reading a really good book called Bounce right now, and I forget that I think it's Matthew Syed, who's an English writer who wrote it. And he sort of talks about where you are and what's around you, and whether it's the people you play with or the challenges you're faced with, like the sort of nurture really does come into play. And I think having the family I had were very important, and the support I had, but there's also a certain point where it's like your own personal motivation. So I think that's really important above having contacts.
Once you're in the circuit, are you assigned with any mentorship, or is it still very much self-propelled that you've got to work the opportunities for yourselves? Or do you start to find that people then are gravitating towards you, who want to help, who want to offer their services and support and coaching and training, and to ski with you and provide some guidance?
No, there's nothing in the circuit that does anything like that. It's sort of all from local stuff. Like when I was in Salt Lake City, I decided I wanted to move to Jackson Hole for the next winter, and I reached out to a training group who were based in Jackson Hole, who sort of they traveled with the teams, but they were more dryland coaches, and it was called Mountain Athlete. And I actually reached out to them because the Jackson Hole crew were traveling as this team, and I knew how important strength and conditioning was before like moving into competition. And so I reached out to them and told them that I wanted to train with them. So sort of that was something that when I was in Jackson, I was sort of part of a team, and it was coincidental that was the year I qualified for the Freeride World Tour. So I sort of did have support. There were other athletes around me, like Crystal Wright was on the tour with me, and she was also from Jackson, and she was a huge mentor. But I think it's just about finding like personal relationships you sort of cultivate, and you realize there's certain people who are really good for you and not, but it takes time. It's not like a structured body. Like at the same time, my sister was on the Olympic path, and she had, a lot of funding and coaches and physios and strength and conditioning, whereas you have to be motivated to find your own support system and create it and like invest in it as well. So I think it's really important, but it's different now. Like there's a lot of teams who are coming up, and Freeride's becoming way more popular, which is awesome, because I think having a support system is so important, and it actually helps you reach your potential.
And from that perspective in the sports system, are you having to proactively go out and find your own sponsors and get yourself from A to B? Are you effectively marketing yourself at the same time as well as training and developing your skiing skills?
100%. Yeah. I did everything myself.
And how competitive is that? Because I imagine everybody else is, within that world is speaking to the same types of people. What were the steps that you have to take to make yourself stand out from the crowd? And especially when you're starting out and you maybe aren't as well known as some of the more established names who already have some podiums under their belt.
I never really saw it as competitive. Like, I think I've always seen other athletes, even when I was competing, especially in the women's field, it's easy to compare and make it competitive, but I always ended up seeing it as those people, if they're succeeding, I'm going to succeed, because we're all climbing the ladder together. And I still see it that way, but you definitely had to be very clear. Like, I would write proposals for sponsors, and I have hundreds of old CVs just trying to show people my abilities and also like the niche that I'm marketable to. But I didn't really understand it fully when I was doing it. People would give me advice. I was like, how do I get a sponsor? And they're like, put all your stuff together, show them all the things that, make you and special, and send it to them. But it took a really long time to put that together as an actual marketable product. It was just learning by doing more than anything. I think now I think about it a lot more because I understand it, and also from marketing, sort of like sponsorship for films and stuff like that. And Anna's got a bachelor in commerce, so sort of we worked together a lot, and I learned a lot from her when we were working on the film for a few years. But as like a young athlete, I just made it up. I have hundreds of emails to sponsors or like team managers. I would go through periods like months at a time where I just email hundreds of brands, and the more background and sort of experience and accomplishments I had, the more I started to realize that I wanted to work with brands who aligned with me versus just trying to get gear and support. So yeah, I think
authenticity is always very important, isn't it? And I don't think there's anything wrong with faking it till you make it. I think that's the path that a lot of people take. But in terms of that side of things, when you're in competition, does it become then extra? Is there extra pressure to perform and podium? Do you need those wins to become more self-sustaining in being able to get from A to B, and maybe being not as reliant upon sponsors? Are you having to find yourself, I need to set these targets and get so many podiums in order to be able to compete at this event and this event and moving forward over the course of any given winter?
I guess I was always had my eyes on the qualifying. When I first started, I just wanted to be progressing every year. And so I was doing that. And I actually qualified for the Freeride World Tour a lot quicker than I was expecting. I sort of had finally gotten into my groove, and I won a few events, and then the tours merged, and I was sort of up there as a pretty high level qualifier. And I also won one of the main qualifying events in America. And so I think they bumped me on for what I don't sort of really know the technical side behind it, but I think I won the qualifiers. So I qualified for the world tour. And at that point, my goal was just to progress. And then obviously getting on the tour, I wanted to stay there. And when I lost my spot, I started really counting podiums a lot more then. And actually, I think that really changed my skiing. And I only did well in competitions after that when I wasn't thinking about podiums. There was a point where I wanted to win just for the money, because I didn't have a lot of support, and prize money meant that I could compete, meant that I could sort of do another season. And one time my sister gave me some really good advice. It's like, you can't be skiing to win or for the money, like even though you know you need that $3,000. And so going into competition without a set goal is really important, other than the goals of sort of like, I want to ski well, I want to hit this jump, I want to ski my line without stopping, I don't want to hesitate before my airs, you know, like I want to do this. Like you can't do it and be like, I want to beat this person, or I want to win, or I want to win that money. I think you need to sort of almost think a bit above that.
When you were in that mindset of, okay, I need to get prize money to fund yourself, did that take away from the love of the sport? Did it have any effect on your enjoyment levels at that time?
Not then, but I think goals outside of progression of your own personal skiing, which has sort of happened after I injured myself. I injured myself in like 2013, and I did 3 qualifying seasons after that. And the pressure to want to get back on the tour, especially the last 2 seasons, that my own personal pressure was really bad. It was unfortunate. Like I feel like I had a pretty good competition season following my injury, and I was really motivated, and I sort of missed the top spot by 1 or 2 places just because I'd sort of done badly in a few competitions. And I think at that point I kind of lost the love a little bit. And that was when I was like in between realizing that I didn't want to compete anymore. I was a bit tired of it. I'd done it for like 4 or 5 years, back-to-back seasons. And I just would love skiing, but wanted to do something else. But it took me a little bit of time to realize that. And I was the next few seasons competing and feeling the pressure to compete because I thought that's what my sponsors wanted, but actually really enjoying the other projects I was doing. Like I did an expedition to Greenland and going on photo shoots, sort of expeditions that were fun, exploratory and more adventurous, and realizing there was like a whole world outside of competition, and competition took a lot of time and money that I didn't want to give it anymore.
Was that a kind of a clean, conscious decision, or did you battle with it for a while, kind of post injury, in terms of wanting to potentially get back into the competitive side of things, or was it, no, I'm enjoying these expeditions, I'm enjoying a different side to skiing, and okay, now I'm done?
Yeah, it was a huge battle. I like would have these crazy seasons of like January to March being all competition, and then like having photo shoots later in the season. And then, I mean, in some ways it was cool because I'd be doing a lot of travel for competitions and it was really fun. But I think that was sort of like the 2014 season. But I think in 2015 and 2016, I really wasn't loving competition. And the stuff that got me excited was trips and like ski mountaineering programs. And it was hard to stop competing because it's instant gratification if you win. That's instant proof that you're what you say you are. Whereas I think getting into more the media side, there's a lot of grey area and you have to build your own career, and that's really scary.
And was that where perhaps you got a bit of an appetite for content creation, and we're coming on to talk about finding a line in your own film, but did you gain a lot of kind of experience, and was that something that you maybe decided that, oh, okay, well, I'd like to do more of this, and then maybe start doing some of your own projects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really lucky to be included in Shades of Winter's second film, Pure. Mm-hmm. And I travelled to Japan with Sandra Landsteiner and 2 other athletes, and watching her create the film was pretty inspiring. And I also spent, prior to that, I'd been on a ski mountaineering course with her and Lindsay Dyer and a few other female athletes. And that really inspired me to see those 2 women then go on to create some of the first like all-female ski movies. And they did it off their own back. It wasn't sort of with a production company, or they sort of created their own production companies. So that gave me, I think it was working with people like them and photographers and journalists and seeing how they created their own projects. And that it didn't, even sort of TTR and MSP come off very passionate people creating production companies out of what they love. And so seeing the behind the scenes of it and how they all worked made my mind start ticking over. And I just was a gradual thing. Like I'd want to do a small photo shoot, or I'd want to, like Shifting Ice and Changing Tides was a film that I made with 5 other women. And we all did different parts of it. And it was watching that and seeing what we could achieve by ourselves was pretty cool.
So with Finding the Line, it takes a very different narrative to a lot of what we perhaps call traditional ski films, and mm-hmm. there's a real focus on exploring your relationship and your sister's relationship with fear, in very different ways and in a very powerful and impactful way. How important was it for you to create something that was maybe a little bit different to what already exists within the ski film industry?
Mm-hmm. I guess it was really important to us because we realised that a few things about our careers are as Australian skiers, and we didn't have what it took right then to put together a huge production like Shades of Winter. And even though we love skiing, we kind of wanted to tell a story that was a little bit different. And I think both of us had just sort of had a lot of challenges as athletes and realised that was an interesting story. And it took us a while to realise that, though. And it wasn't something that happens straight away, but one of our main sort of like baseline things is like, we're two middle class white chicks, so we need to make a story that isn't just about us skiing. It has to be about something more. And I think that's because we both love those stories ourselves, and so we wanted to make something like that because we'd had so many books and films and documentaries that we'd watched that inspired us as athletes, and so we wanted to create something of that type. And honestly, it ended up being much better than we'd ever expected. I think we surprised ourselves. Yeah, and that was thanks as well. Like, I think it was our brainchild, but it was thanks to the people we worked with that helped us make it come alive. So,
and was it always a case that you wanted to do something together, or did that sort of develop over time that you came together on the project?
No, the main idea was to do something together. We actually pitched a segment to Warren Miller at first about like a sister story about us and how similar yet different we were, and how I guess it is kind of interesting. Like, two girls from Australia, both of us spent most of all of our childhood there. We weren't sort of traveling overseas every season to ski. Anna did at one point when she was competing in Europe in moguls, but how we'd sort of grown up and ended up on an international stage competing, and we were so similar and so different, and we had a pretty funny vibe together. So we sort of always wanted to work together, but we pitched it more as a ski segment to start with a little bit of personality, and then when we realised no one was going to pick it up, we wanted to make our own film. So yeah.
And so when you pitched to Warren Miller, did they entertain the idea? Were they interested, or was it a thanks but no thanks?
I think we were only at the very beginning of it, and we did it through one of their contacts in Australia. And so, yeah, it didn't really go. It didn't ever have legs. We put it forward, and that's about as far as it got. So.
And it must feel so much more rewarding to have done it under your own steam and under your own editorial kind of control than under somebody else's.
Oh, totally. Like, I feel like at the time it felt a lot more safe to have done it with other production company, and given the opportunity would have like ran for it. But in retrospect now, I'm so glad we did it by ourselves, because we learned so much and we really got to control the story and make it exactly how we wanted. Whereas I think maybe a bigger production company would have chosen some more of the like popularist styles of filmmaking or storyline. So I think we got to make something really personal and really interesting because we did it by ourselves, and like we were literally sitting in the editing room with the editors and just making decisions on what was going to happen next. So yeah,
I think the thing that grabbed me as a viewer right from the very beginning was that this was a very human film, and you yourself as a professional skier and your sister as a professional skier, straight away you're talking and discussing and debating and trying to go for a particular line, and you're hearing that discussion and you think, well, but almost as a viewer you're thinking, well, you're both professional athletes, so surely this should be kind of a breeze, because you don't see that side of the conversation. You just see the commitment to the line and the athletes kind of skiing, and of course there's crash reels which get thrown into ski films, but you don't often see, very rarely see that discussion and conversation that goes into it. So how important was it for you to sort of humanize the sport as well within the narrative of the film?
I think that was actually the main aim, really. So it's good that it came through. I think that showing what happens behind the scenes, of skiing and freeride skiing, and like that the journey that even us developing as characters and as skiers was really important. Because I think, fear was the main, and it's been a while since I've talked about this, so I might be a bit roundabout, sorry. But, fear being the main focus in the film, you sort of don't want to show your fears. And Anna and I had this really interesting conversation in the editing room, because we kept on looking for moments when we were showing our fear. And like, we were quite vulnerable on camera at times. But like, before you drop in, you've got like your face, you've got your guard up, you've got your goggles on, you've got game face on, and you don't want anyone, including yourself, to see your fear, because you're faking it till you make it. It's like before you drop in. And I guess my personality is quite like, I'm pretty open about things, and Anna is as well to a certain degree, but she was sort of saying, like, before she dropped in for competitions, she was like a guard up, because you had to believe in yourself. And so you don't see that fear when at the beginning of a line or in ski movies, and it's almost not because they're like omitting it, it's because the athletes even don't want to show it, because they need to have their body armor up to get through things sometimes. So, but as someone standing next to the other person before or after a line, you sort of realize that there's a lot more going on. And I think that what's going on is so interesting, especially because what happens in skiing and risk mitigation and all of that is so similar to life and all of the challenges we face. And that's when we started talking about it, that's what got us really excited and passionate. And so that was the main aim of the film, especially by the time we got to the editing stages of the film, was having that conversation and trying to show it. And so we really had to work hard and finding the clips where you could see it, and there weren't that many. There's these funny moments when I know Anna was afraid and I can see her face, but you just can't see anything because she's got her goggles on, and I'm like, her little lips go and you sort of know the other person's afraid. And so having to find the interviews that sort of coupled with the shots, and like, I guess I'm good at remembering footage, because whenever we were looking for shots, I sat with the editor to try and find them. And Anna and I were sitting in the back doing that so often, being like, oh, what about this shot? What about that moment? And we'd go there and be like, oh, I was like, I had my goggles on and I didn't want anyone to see that I was afraid, even though we were making a film about fear. So it was an interesting process to sort of recognize how we like really shut down. Anyway.
When you talk about, because it's quite, in working as a former ski instructor myself, I remember the first thing that I ever got taught when I was doing my level 1 course out in Canada was I got told off for wearing my goggles, because they couldn't see your eyes, and you said 90% of communication, or whatever the statistic is through body language, and so much of that is through the eyes. So I can imagine that was that something that changed in, did you realize that partway through the filmmaking, where it was like, oh, okay, we're going to put the goggles up to be able to get more expression here?
No, I think unfortunately it took us we had so much going on, like we sort of missed some of that. We missed some pretty important moments on GoPro, like POV cameras and things like that, just because they kind of weren't there, but we managed to salvage it in the end. But yeah, it was something we realized more afterwards. But it's funny you say that, because I remember this one film edit I watched of a skier in Alaska who was skiing beautifully, and a guy who was staying at my house at the time, who's sort of like a intermediate skier, was like, oh, they just look superhuman. And maybe that's something to do with it, is that when people are doing sports where they are sort of really closed up, they seem so much less human, so it's almost is harder to relate with it. So I guess cracking down that that mold was important in our film without getting too deep. Yeah.
And I think one of the lines that you say is that the moment that you feel fear, you freeze. Is that something which became more apparent after your knee injury? Did you feel that, or did you have that before? Is it something that you've always had?
I think it was after that specific injury, but also maybe a few other things where, and I mean, without going into it too deeply, I just think both age and even sometimes gender and some other things play into account. Like, I think I always was a little bit more analytical. Sounds wrong, because it's not that Anna isn't analytical, but like, I think she just like shuts her mind down. Like, she makes a conscious choice with tunnel vision. Even when we were younger, there was like a jump that the freestyle team would build, and you'd go and hit it and jump and do tricks at night under lights, and all like the kids would come and watch it. And I remember doing it and wanting to do harder tricks, but never wanting to push myself to a certain level because that was the comfort zone. And I think Anna was much better pushing outside of the comfort zone. And I think that I was always a little bit more cautious. So, but the freezing and like becoming cautious more quickly, I think happened after an injury. And like being able to push yourself past that is a really important moment, especially if you're wanting to keep on skiing at a high level in freeride, like, or anything. It's almost like scar tissue. Like you need to push against it to break it down, because otherwise it's going to form and it's going to be really hard to move past that. So like scar tissue in your knee, if you don't do exercise and actually push yourself and challenge yourself, breaking down those fears that have built up as a result of especially an acute accident, I think it's really important. And I mean, like, I'm not a psychologist by any means, but just even some friends around me, I watch them with injuries specifically and seeing how they sort of baby it, and realizing that, like, because of people around me, I realized that it was important to push past. And so at one point I had to stop my brain thinking, and I had to like fully do an Anna and be like, I have to stop thinking if I want to do this. And even when I was doing backflips and everything like that in the film, like I would stop thinking and just be like, these are the motions and that's all I'm thinking about. So I think the freezing started happening after the knee injury, but I always had it. And it was just part of the more cautious side of me.
From that switching off side of things, and from, being acknowledging it within yourself and acknowledging it as being, the story construct for the film, did you find the filmmaking process quite cathartic, and did it help you or change in any way your relationship with fear by documenting it?
100%. Yeah. And even while making the film, it made me realize like moments when I would become afraid. And I would stop, and that sort of moment of fear clicking in and realizing that fear would make me fear is like almost an irrational thing, and your brain, it shuts down. So stopping myself and breathing and turning my brain back on and trying to become rational about it, and being like, why am I afraid of this? I'm afraid of this because I'm worried of the landing. Go and look at the landing. The landing looks fine. Is the landing okay? And so during the film, I actually was trying to push myself. And like when we were in BC, especially, like realizing that landing in powder meant that you could kind of crash pretty hard and not hurt yourself was really important. And then going to Chamonix and being like, those moments when you're worried are important because these are no fall zones. And so like, it was really interesting to like exercise a bit of control over fear and listen to it and then not listen to it. And when we got to Alaska, I struggled a little bit more because I was really out of my comfort zone because I'd never been there and it was just such different terrain. And I wish I'd pushed myself a little harder. But we didn't have the greatest conditions, so it was kind of hard to really go full throttle.
Just on the locations, how much of it seemed and it felt that your relationships or the relationship with your sister would maybe change in different types of terrain, that one of you would perhaps take the lead in certain types of terrain and over and above the, obviously in BC, that's Anna's playground, and then in Chamonix, that was your world. How conscious of a decision were the locations that you chose to go to in exploring your own relationship with Anna as part of that story?
Like 100% conscious. Like we did everything for that reason. Alaska, I feel like Anna had a stronger connection to Alaska, but in the end, I felt just as connected. Like it's sort of this mecca of both styles, like being playful, pushing yourself, but also understanding the risks. So yeah, after a lot of conversation and like writing the story, we narrowed down those places as well because one of us had more influence and a stronger background, and we'd be nurturing the other one, both physically because we lived there and mentally because it was like our comfort zone. So yeah, Chamonix 100% is much more my comfort zone. It was an interesting thing though, because I injured myself. I really needed a lot of support. And so Anna really had to step up in that area and she killed it. Like she went out and skied lines with Bjarne just by pure will without me, because she was like, I want to go and do this. So that was pretty amazing.
And Bjarne, for those who don't know, he was the director of the film. And how much has your relationship with your sister changed over the course of the filmmaking process as well?
We had a lot of ups and downs, but if anything, just we're super close now. And I think we both realized following the film, making the film, how important it was to have a partner in crime who is got the same, I don't know, like is committed to the work you're doing. And I don't know if I've found I haven't had another partner like that since working with Anna, as in terms of like a producer or another athlete who wanted to work as much on a film as I do. Like, it was sometimes I would be more motivated and vice versa, but like one of us was always on and would be like, get to work, and would always respond like, yep, picking up my stuff, I'm getting this done. Whereas I've worked since then in other relationships, and they haven't been anywhere near as efficient, because I just knew I could rely on her. And I knew she'd put in 110%. So I think that was pretty important, and like built a really good trust between us. Yeah.
And did you have clear, defined roles that you gave yourselves prior to the process taking place, where you took ownership over certain sections, or was it a bit more fluid than that?
Yes and no. There was times when like we took ownership over certain things. Like, for instance, I think I did a lot of music rights and things like that, whereas Anna was much more savvy on sponsorship, and I've got a design background, so I did all the sort of art and design and pictures, but we kind of worked together on things, and I think we both had to learn each other's skills in order to take the workload off each other. So yeah, we learned a lot, and learned a lot about like teamwork and working together, and that you can't do everything, and you have to sort of share your skills with your partners so that you can work together. But sometimes, like, especially, like, it just became easier for one of us to do certain things. So yeah,
and having Bjarne on board as well. It's obviously your film. This is your passion project for both of you. Did you find that easy or difficult to kind of give over some of the control to a director who obviously will have his own influences on, you know, what you should be doing, and maybe setting up different shots and maybe different ways to which you envisage? How did that relationship and dynamic work? Was it something that you found ultimately, you know, helpful, or did it cause some tension during the production process?
During filming, I think we were so lucky to have him, because neither Anna nor I had been really worked out outside of just being the athletes. Like, and on photo shoots, like I could see lines, and I love shooting with photographers and doing really artsy things because that's part of my background. But we had no experience in filmmaking. So Bjarne just really brought it all. And if anything, we almost backed off, or like I learned to back off and let him make the calls. And so maybe prior to a day out, or like during the day, would be like, this is what we want to do as athletes, but we kind of let him take on as much as possible. And I don't know what he'd say to that, but like, especially as time went on, like backing off and letting him decide what we needed to shoot. And we'd sort of be quite strongly opinionated maybe about the interviews we wanted to do, but we talked about them as a team. So yeah, he, in post-production, I think it was a little harder because we were editing from isolation, and at one point we changed editors, and not isolation, but like distance. And I think that there were some times when how we envisaged the film changed. And so that was a harder process, and I would really recommend to anyone who's editing a film to spend time with their sort of post-production team, because you kind of have to be there. So there was definitely challenges in post-production, but in production, like Bjarne was the filmmaker and he did an amazing job. So yeah.
I think as a viewer, and it certainly went down incredibly well with our audience over here in London. So I think you all pulled together as a team, did a stunning job. It's an incredible film, which is available to view now on Red Bull TV for anybody who wants to check it out. Finding the Line, free to view, Red Bull TV. And something that you touched on there with the role that you had to play within music was something that I want to ask you about, because kind of a staple with any ski film is the soundtrack. How important or was it to you, or how did you go about selecting songs for for the film, and could you maybe talk a little bit about kind of that process?
Mm-hmm, of course. So music was a little bit of an afterthought for us in some ways, and I think Bjarne, who had more experience editing and making films, was sort of saying he was like, oh, we can do a lot of what's the word, compose music, or maybe pay a composer. And so that was sort of our plan for quite a while, is to pay a composer or to do certain things with music. And we were also looking for some bigger tracks to use in the action parts. And so we had a playlist of songs that we were really into. And right after we finished filming, I started looking into how to license music. And it became like way more difficult than I realized. First of all, because you have to find the people who own the licenses. And then you need to speak to 2 or 3 different people minimum just to have the rights. And then they all have to agree, but they can't all be on the same email. You can't just all be like, this is what we have. You have to send separate emails to everyone because they're different people being represented by different agencies. And so one track had 6 different agents I had to speak to. And you sort of have to plead your case separately to all of them. And so we sort of wanted a Lord track and a Florence and the Machine track, and realized it was going to cost us $50,000. And then starting to learn what in perpetuity was. And I'd be on the phone to sort of Universal Music and be like, can you explain what that actually is? And I'd be sort of researching it and writing these horribly uneducated emails to people who I bet would get them in their inboxes, just being like, oh, why is this person wasting my time? But after a while, we started building up a really good relationship with certain agencies. So it ended up the same person would hold the rights to several of the tracks we wanted. And so we went about music by, after a while, realizing that we needed to find less popular music, but still amazing music. We used an Australian radio station called Triple J, and they have this really good online sort of series of unearthed artists from Australia, and we sort of picked out some music from them and contacted them, and some of them actually even let us use their music for free. Others we worked through the Australian agencies or production agencies, but we did choose 1 or 2 tracks. The first iteration of the film, which is 58 minutes long, which we showed live, has these beautiful French songs from Camille, and we had to change them, and also the last track, because when we recut the film for Red Bull, it had to be 52 minutes long, and we had to relicense the music, and we ended up asking some Australian artists to compose specific music to sort of fit in those areas, because we couldn't find anything that fit to our budget. So yeah, the music was a huge process. And on top of that, we had to go to stock music channels to sort of find all the backing tracks for things, because we decided not to have a composer. So I think having a music plan before starting to make a film is so key, because I've spoken to other filmmakers about licensing music, and they almost, if they're making just a 1-song edit, they'll license the music before they start making the film. And I would now maybe start with that, or what during production be finding the music I want to use, because you've got Artlist and Marmoset and a few other things, but the tracks get used a lot, and trying to find something original that really speaks to your film is hard. And so even making the trailer, finding music for that was tricky and expensive.
So that whole end-to-end process from kind of concept to finishing and distribution, how long did the whole process take?
September 2015, and we sold the film and it went online September 2019.
It's quite a long period of time. I think probably most people don't necessarily kind of realise when they're sitting there watching a piece of content how much work can go into it. Is it giving you a taste to do more? Is it something that you would do again, or is it kind of put you off creating your own content on such a big scale, because it is a feature length film? Where do you stand kind of on things now from producing another of your own films?
It definitely gave me an appetite for it, but it taught me a lot of things about having budget before you start, really planning the budget. And I think it took us, a part of our development was the story, recognizing when you're ready. We sort of shot over 2 years in the end because of budgeting issues and everything like that. But also just being aware that it takes time. I've got a film in the works right now that we were meant to go and shoot I was meant to be shooting on it right now, and this is the second year it's been delayed. And it's just one of those things that you just have to wait and be okay about waiting for, because if it's meant to work and be the best it can be, it just takes time, and you have to put in the effort to make it work. And sometimes delays are good for development and things like that. So I definitely still want to do them. I don't know about feature length though. I think especially just with documentaries, I think we're really lucky with how long our film was, that we had enough action for the length of it. But I would almost make it, like, I wouldn't do much above 30 minutes right now. I'd almost prefer to do short projects until there was a project that was really worth it.
I know you say on your website that you've got a passion in particular for working on female-driven content, which of course finding the line is, although it's not necessarily, the fact that you and Anna are sisters is it's not necessarily the headline of the film by any means. It's just it's humanizing the sport and that discussion with Fia. But how important is it for you in the work that you're doing now to kind of push the female perspective in skiing more, or in the wider context of the projects that you're working on?
I just think it's like an underlying thing that I'm always passionate about. It always comes back to it, but it's not something that needs to always be highlighted. That it is, like, I think that's what real equality is. It's not that it's a male or a female. It's just that there is room and space for female content. And I think it's wanted, but I don't know if it's slowly becoming room for it, but you still have to fight for a certain number of women or female filmmakers to be in a space. It's not equal yet. So I think that's why making a point that you want female content out there, or female perspective, whether it's the women who are in front of the camera or behind the camera, that's really important to me, just because it's different. And it's not to say male content is better than female content. It's just different. And having space for everything, because everyone's different and sees things differently and is interested in different things. And I think it's really important, but I also don't want to only do all female things, because the perspective of all genders is really important. So yeah, it's just like it's like underlying.
And is there anything currently in the works that you're developing at the moment?
Yeah, I'm working on a documentary it's sort of a mountain culture history documentary about Armenia, and a good friend of mine whose family's from Armenia. And so we were meant to go there this year and do a short film about skiing there and climbing some mountains there. And that's just been delayed until next year. And then there's maybe a few more projects closer to home that's sort of more environmentally focused, just about the sort of really beautiful mountains and like interior rainforest around Revelstoke. But that one's a little bit less organised, whereas the Armenian project was like ready to start the ignition on, I guess. Yeah.
How important do you think the content creation side of the sport is now? Because it's there is this dissemination of the media where people can create their own content, don't necessarily need to go down that traditional ski movie route that you initially looked at with Warren Miller, or you mentioned sort of MSP and Tet on Gravity there. How much of a culture shift is there in terms of being that professional athlete but connected with content? So do you think that competition is as important of an ingredient as it has been now, or do you think it's more about just getting your film seen, your images seen, your stories out there? If you're filming with the crew, is that all you need to be a pro skier now? What sort of differences have you noticed, kind of, I guess, in that transition that you've been on yourself in terms of what's happening with the next wave of pro athletes coming into the sport?
Big question. I think it just varies. I think that there's a lot of different types of athletes, and everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and also different passions. Like, I'm really interested not just in content creation, but in creating stories. I'm not as focused on making like quick content that is digested really quickly and then forgotten about. And it's not because I don't like that kind of content. I love it. I think it's great and it's got a place. But just for me, like, I'm really passionate about telling stories. And so that's my focus. But there's other athletes who have different focus, might be more action focused, or like showing a progression that's like on a side of a sport that doesn't have a production company, you know, like what's it called? Like the Finnish crew of skiers or urban givers, and like have been making their own content for ages, and sort of like in the last few years have been much more recognized. But I think you just have to go and do your thing. And if you're trying to become famous by adhering to like what is now, you'll get there. But I think it's way more interesting when you're yourself and you just follow your own path, because sooner or later people are going to be stoked on that. If you're really that passionate and you're really making something and putting effort and time into it. But that's just me personally.
You've moved around a bit. You mentioned, you've spent time in Chamonix, Treblecombe, and Salt Lake City. You're now in Revelstoke. What is it that makes any particular destination your mountain? What key ingredients do you need to have in order to, to find your feet somewhere? As a ski pro.
I guess it really depends on the person. I find the terrain and the mountain community probably the biggest draw, usually, like sort of the motivation in the community and like the access to mountain stuff. And it changed depending on what my goals were. I think that living in Europe for me had some really amazing pros, but I realized that if I wanted to continue my career, I just realized that North America would maybe be a better place for me with more opportunity, just based on my experience. And so moving here, it was a really good move. But yeah, everywhere, it just depended, but it was really to do with like access to the mountain and community. Usually like I wanted to live somewhere where I knew I was moving in with like-minded people, and every mountain community was slightly different and had its like the things I loved and things I disliked. And yeah, it took a little bit of time to decide to move to Canada and decide where in Canada I wanted to live. But I'm really glad I moved to Revelstoke because it's sort of got a bit of everything. It's like a big town in terms of tourism. It gets really busy. It's got a lot going on in the winter and even the summer, but then it's also like a really nice small town and a really beautiful community. So I think that's why I moved here in the end.
And so does it feel like home now, or do you still have kind of itchy feet to maybe go explore some new destinations and live in some new mountain areas? Or is Revelstoke, a home for a bit of a longer period of time than maybe some of the other places that you've been through on your travels?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is definitely home 100%. I wasn't trying to always travel so much. It was just difficult because I couldn't live in places for visa reasons. Whereas I've like made a concerted effort here to live in Canada and try and stay here and get my permanent residency and sort of make a like home here. I was trying to do the same thing in Chamonix, but the visa process was just a lot more difficult. And because of the transient nature of the valley, I, after a while, realized that it maybe wasn't the place for me. And for different reasons, it was a lot further away from my family. So I think that sort of starts coming into play, especially as you're getting older and making a home. You're like, it's a 30-hour plane trip for my family to come visit me. That's an issue, whereas it's sort of 15 hours from Australia to Canada.
The final question I want to ask you is, how are your glass blowing skills developing?
Oh, I haven't been back yet. So not great. I just maybe visualizing it a lot. But I'm really excited about trying to get back there once sort of social distancing's over and we can start trying it again. But it's really cool. Actually, it's so amazing, the glass blowing studio in the Big Eddy and a few other places in town that do stuff like that in Revelstoke. It's a big, small town. It's got so much to offer, but it's actually a pretty small town. So I'm excited about summer kicking off again whenever it happens and getting to really do those things again.
Well, fingers crossed we'll come through the other side of this current situation sooner rather than later. But thanks so much for having the time to chat, Nat. I really appreciate it. And if people listening and watching want to find out more, where can they find you?
So you can find me on my website, nataliesegal.com, or on Instagram at Nat Segal, Nat_Segal. Usually all of my other things are sort of linked through there. You can send me an email or a message, and just say hi.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Nat. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Cameron. Have a great day.